declined. The word, cold and metallic, spat from the payment terminal and hung in the air of Le Monde des Jouets, the city's most exclusive toy store, a sanctuary of childhood luxury where the price of a teddy bear could feed a family for a month. Michael Weber Schmidt, the store manager, glanced at the terminal, then at the man before him, and a thinly veiled sneer twisted the corner of his lips. He saw a man in a faded gray hoodie, worn jeans, and an air of weariness that clashed with the polished gleam of the marble beneath his feet. Beside the man, a little girl about 8 years old rocked back and forth, a steady, rhythmic motion, her eyes fixed on some point on the ceiling, utterly absorbed in her own world. "Sir," Michael said, his voice dripping with false politeness, "it appears there's an issue with your payment." Alexander Collins Manolis was only 42, but in that moment, he felt the weight of a century. He knew his new Black Centurion card, issued that very morning, had likely triggered a security alert for such a high purchase on its first transaction. A 30-second call would sort it all out, but it wasn't about the call. It was about Michael's gaze. A look that stripped him bare, that judged him, that cataloged him as an imposter in this temple of opulence. And worse, it was about how that gaze flickered to his daughter, Sophia Miller, with a mix of impatience and contempt. Alexander had never imagined that, in trying to fulfill his daughter's dream, he would be met with such raw prejudice. He felt the eyes of the other customers drawn by the small scene. Humiliation was a slow poison, seeping into his veins. But instead of anger, an icy calm washed over Alexander. He wasn't surprised. He had seen that look before in boardrooms, in negotiations, on the faces of investors who underestimated him when he was just a young entrepreneur with a revolutionary idea and no heavy surname to back him up. He had learned to turn others' underestimation into his secret fuel. "I'll try again," Alexander said, his voice level, taking the card back. He already suspected that day would be a test. The store, the attitude, everything felt like a microcosm of the world he fought to protect Sophia from. He remembered a conversation with his late wife, Elena Gallagher Brown, weeks before she passed. They were watching Sophia, who was perfectly lining up hundreds of colored pebbles in the garden. "The world wasn't built for souls like hers, Alex," Elena had said, her voice soft but firm. "They'll try to box her in, call her strange, difficult. Our job isn't to change who she is. It's to change the world so it's worthy of her." Those words echoed in his mind now, as Michael snatched the card from his hand with a theatrical sigh. "Sir, perhaps it would be best to use a payment method you know has funds," Michael said, loud enough for the woman beside them, who was examining a $5,000 dollhouse, to turn and stare. The humiliation now had an audience. The toy in question was no ordinary one. It was Ilara's planetarium, a one-of-a-kind piece, handcrafted by a Swiss artisan, a crystal orb that projected moving constellations onto the ceiling with astronomical precision. Sophia was nonverbal, but she communicated through patterns, through light, and above all, through the stars. Her obsession with the cosmos was the bridge connecting her to the world and to the memory of her mother, an amateur astronomer. Elena had shown her the constellation Lyra on her first night home, and ever since, Sophia spent hours drawing complex star charts, her only clear and unequivocal form of expression. That planetarium wasn't a whim. It was a tool, a language, a piece of the sky he could give her to hold in her hands. Alexander looked at Sophia. She had stopped rocking. Her eyes, previously lost in the ceiling, were now fixed on the planetarium within its glass dome. A small sound, a low, anxious murmur, escaped her lips. She understood what was happening. She felt the tension, the hostility. She felt the rejection. Alexander's heart shattered. That sound was worse than any insult. It was the pain of his daughter manifesting. That's when he made a decision. This was no longer about a toy. It was about dignity. Michael tried swiping the card a second time, with deliberate slowness, and the inevitable "declined" sounded again, even louder. "As I thought," Michael said, pushing the card back to Alexander. "Perhaps you should seek out a store more suitable to your budget. We have a policy to ensure the environment remains exclusive for our clientele." The word "exclusive" was a euphemism for rich, and suitable to your budget was a direct insult. The poison was served. Gabrielle Moreau, a younger sales associate watching from afar, averted her gaze, visibly uncomfortable but remaining silent, intimidated by her manager's authority. Alexander took the card, slowly tucked it into his pocket, and crouched, down to Sophia's level. He gently touched her arm. "Come on, sweetheart. We'll find a better sky," he whispered, just for her to hear. While everyone in the store saw a defeated father walking away with his head down, they couldn't see the expression in Alexander's eyes. It wasn't defeat. It was calculation. His eyes revealed a serenity that only comes to those who have faced much worse storms and survived to tell the tale. There, before all the scornful gazes, he stood firm as one who guards a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If this story of prejudice and resilience has touched your heart, prepare yourself, because you won't believe how a simple moment of humiliation was about to become the catalyst for a silent revolution that would shake the foundations of that luxury empire. The glass door of Le Monde de Jouet closed behind Alexander and Sophia, but the hostility of the store seemed to follow them into the cold night air. Humiliation wasn't a new wound for Alexander, but seeing it splash onto his daughter was intolerable. In the car, the silence was heavy. Sophia was curled up in her car seat, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the car window, a retreat into the safe haven of her mind. Alexander knew those patterns were her way of processing, of organizing the emotional chaos the store manager had created. Michael Weber Schmidt's contempt didn't end when they left. That very evening, a post appeared on the store's official Instagram page. It was an elegant photo of the store's interior captioned, "Maintaining the magic and exclusivity for those who truly appreciate it. Curated environment, true luxury." There were no names, but the message was clear, a smug nod to the clientele who shared Michael's elitist mindset. Within hours, the post garnered hundreds of likes and supportive comments, with people praising the store for maintaining standards and filtering clientele. Each like was a small stab in Alexander's heart. The world was applauding the cruelty that made his daughter shrink. Injustice was now public, celebrated as a virtue. He saw how it affected Sophia. That night, she didn't want her books about galaxies. She refused to eat dinner. Instead, she sat on her bedroom floor in the dark, rocking gently, the rhythmic sound of her body against the wall the only soundtrack to her distress. It was her way of coping with sensory and emotional overload, a self-regulation method that people like Michael would interpret as another sign she was weird or misbehaved. To Alexander, it was the sound of pure suffering. He sat in the hallway outside her door, feeling helpless. The money he had accumulated, the empires he had built, none of it could protect her from the pain of being misunderstood. It was in that long night that sorrow turned into a determination as cold as steel. He remembered his humble origins, growing up in a neighborhood where stores like that were a distant universe. He remembered the hunger, not just for food, but for opportunity, for respect. Every success in his life had been a battle against underestimation, against closed doors and dismissive glances. He built Collins Manolis Tech from scratch, transforming a garage startup into a global tech conglomerate, precisely to prove that a person's worth isn't measured by their zip code or the brand of their clothes. And now, that same prejudice he had fought his entire life to overcome was threatening his daughter's peace. The motivation that propelled him was no longer just paternal love. It was the reawakening of his most primal fighting instinct. He wasn't just going to get revenge on an arrogant store manager. He was going to uproot the problem. He was going to buy the entire poisonous garden so he could replant it with seeds of empathy and inclusion. The next day, he made a call. On the other end was Julia Moretti, his chief operating officer, and the most brilliant strategist he had ever known. "Julia," he said, his voice calm but laced with an intensity she immediately recognized as the prelude to a seismic business move. "I need you to investigate Groupe de Luxe Retail, the parent company of Le Monde de Jouet. I want to know everything. Share structure, debts, vulnerabilities. I want a full dossier by end of day." There was a pause. Julia didn't ask why. She knew Alexander. "Consider it done, Alex," she replied. Meanwhile, Michael Weber Schmidt was living the pinnacle of his career. The viral post had earned him praise from regional management. He was congratulated for his brand management and for cultivating an atmosphere of exclusivity. He felt invincible, a guardian of good taste. In a team meeting, he used the incident as an example of how to handle unwanted customers, unaware that Gabriele Moreau, the sales associate who witnessed it all, felt a knot in her stomach. He completely underestimated the man he had humiliated. To him, Alexander was just a forgotten face in the crowd, a nobody who dared cross the threshold of his little kingdom. He didn't know that this nobody was, at that very moment, poring over financial statements that could buy and sell his little kingdom 1,000 times over. Every new humiliation, every comment supporting the prejudiced post, only strengthened something within Alexander that his oppressors couldn't see, a silent force being fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that each act of disdain was writing its own sentence of defeat. For a moment, when Alexander lowered his head upon leaving the store, everyone thought they had broken his spirit. But those who know true strength know that it grows precisely in silence, in observation, in meticulous preparation for the storm to come. The following weeks turned into a corporate chess match played in the shadows. While Michael Weber Schmidt reveled in his newfound fame as a tough manager, receiving pats on the back from the local elite who frequented his store, Alexander and Julia Moretti worked tirelessly, assembling what they internally called Project Alara. The name, a tribute to the planetarium that started it all, was a constant reminder of what was at stake. The first hurdle was the very structure of Groupe Deluxe Retail. It was an old, proud family conglomerate, with shares tightly held by a handful of heirs who rarely sold. A direct hostile takeover would be noisy, expensive, and likely unsuccessful. "They're a fortress, Alex," Julia said during a late-night meeting, pointing to a complex org chart projected on the wall of Alexander's conference room. "But every fortress has a weak point. The weak point, as Julia discovered after days of deep investigation, was a massive silent debt to an Asian investment bank, the result of a poorly planned expansion into the Chinese luxury market. The group was bleeding money, and the facade of success was maintained by a thread. This was the first glimmer of hope. The strategy shifted. Instead of a frontal assault, they opted for a stealthy approach. Using a series of shell companies and intermediaries, Alexander began buying up Groupe Deluxe's debt. He secretly became the company that had humiliated him's largest creditor. Simultaneously, he needed an inside ally, someone on the board who could be persuaded. His research led him to a name, Matteo Romano, a younger board member known for his progressive ideas and his constant clashes with the company's conservative old guard, led by CEO Rami Smirnov. Alexander orchestrated a chance encounter with Matteo at a tech conference in Zurich. He didn't talk about takeovers. Instead, he spoke about the future of retail, about the importance of inclusion, about how new generations of consumers value brands with social purpose. He planted the seed. Matteo was intrigued by Alexander's vision, unaware he was speaking to the man who would soon control his company's destiny. Meanwhile, Michael's behavior grew increasingly arrogant. Bolstered by the praise, he became a tyrant in the store, berating staff for minor infractions and treating any customer who didn't fit his mold of wealth with veiled disdain. He sent an email to corporate headquarters boasting about how his strict policies had elevated the store's profile, citing an increase in high-value item sales. That email, a piece of digital hubris, was discreetly forwarded to one of Julia's contacts within the company and saved in a secure file on Alexander's server. It was documentary proof that the prejudice wasn't an isolated incident, but a celebrated policy. At home, Alexander saw small victories. With the help of an occupational therapist, he built Sophia a Cosmos corner in her room, complete with star projectors, textured books about planets, and a weighted blanket simulating gravity. Slowly, she began to emerge from her shell. One evening, she handed Alexander a drawing. It was a detailed sketch of the constellation Lyra, and in the center, instead of the star Vega, she had drawn a small heart. Alexander framed it and placed it on his office desk. It was his reminder, his North Star. The plan entered its final phase. With most of the debt in his possession, Alexander now had the leverage he needed. He used his position as creditor to force a shareholder meeting, citing concerns about the financial direction and long-term brand sustainability. Panic set in at Group Deluxe. Rami Smirnov, the CEO, tried to fight back, but he was cornered. The fortress was about to crumble from within. It was when everyone laughed at Alexander that something unexpected began to take shape. Not just in the financial markets, but most importantly in the determined gaze of a father who now shone with an intensity that would make an entire industry realize something extraordinary was about to happen. For a moment, when Alexander accepted the humiliation without protest, Michael and the others thought they would witness just another predictable failure. But under the weight of those condescending gazes, a brilliant strategy was being forged, proving that real power doesn't shout. It plans, it waits, and at the right time, it moves the world. The day of reckoning arrived in the form of an elegant invitation. An extraordinary leadership meeting was called at the Group Deluxe retail headquarters. All store managers, regional directors, and top executives were instructed to attend. The atmosphere was thick with tension and speculation. Rumors of a financial restructuring had been circulating for days. Michael Weber Schmidt, however, arrived exuding confidence. In his mind, this meeting was an opportunity. With his store's success, he was convinced he would be praised, perhaps even promoted. He chose his best suit, greeted colleagues with an air of superiority, and took a seat in the front row, eager for the spotlight. In the back of the room, discreetly, sat Alexander Collins Manolis. No one recognized him. To them, he was just an assistant to some executive, an anonymous face in the crowd. Michael caught a glimpse of him, and a small, mocking smile flickered across his face, vaguely remembering the hoodie dad. The meeting began with Rami Smirnov, the weary-looking CEO, taking the stage. He spoke in somber tones about economic challenges and the need for a new strategic direction. Then he made the announcement that shocked the room. To secure the group's future, Smirnov said, his voice faltering slightly. The board of directors has voted to accept a majority acquisition offer. As of today, Group Deluxe Retail has a new owner and chairman. A murmur swept through the auditorium. Michael leaned forward, curious. I'd like to invite our new leader to the stage, Mr. Alexander Collins Manolis. The name hung in the air for a second of absolute silence. Then, Alexander rose from his seat in the back and walked calmly towards the stage. The transformation on the faces in the audience was a spectacle in itself. Confusion turned to astonishment, and for one man in the front row, to sheer terror. Michael Weber Schmidt's face drained of all color. His eyes widened. His jaw dropped. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. The disheveled father. The man whose card was declined. The nobody. He was there, on stage, as his new boss, the owner of it all. Alexander reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the audience, his eyes pausing for a moment on Michael, a gaze devoid of anger, just a cutting calm that was 1,000 times more intimidating. "Good morning," Alexander began, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "Many of you are wondering who I am. I am a father, and a few weeks ago my most important moment wasn't closing a multi-billion-dollar deal, but trying to buy a gift for my daughter." He told the story, omitting names in the store. He described his daughter's excitement, the importance of that specific toy, and then he described the humiliation, the way he was judged by his appearance, the pain he saw in his daughter's eyes when they were treated like garbage. "That experience taught me something," he continued, "that true luxury isn't in the price of a product. It's in the dignity with which we treat every person who walks through our doors." At that moment, the giant screen behind Alexander lit up. On it appeared the email Michael had sent to corporate, the email in which he boasted about his policies to elevate the store's profile. Alexander read aloud the most damning sentence. "We have successfully filtered out the unwanted clientele, creating a more comfortable environment for our true customers." The silence in the room was deafening. All eyes turned to Michael, who was now visibly trembling in his seat. "Mr. Weber Schmidt," Alexander said, finally using his name. "Would you please stand?" Michael stood, staggering. "Do you refer to my 8-year-old daughter as unwanted clientele?" The question hung in the air, devastating. Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was broken. "You are fired," Alexander said simply. "Security, please escort Mr. Schmidt out." As Michael was escorted out of the auditorium in complete disgrace, Alexander made his next announcement. Effective today, our company will be partnering with the world's leading autism advocacy organizations. We will be launching the AUTISM initiative, which will redesign our stores to be sensory-friendly, and every one of our employees will undergo rigorous training in inclusion and empathy. And then came the final act, the unthinkable. A side door opened, and Sophia Miller entered, holding her therapist's hand. She walked with surprising calmness towards the stage. Alexander knelt, and she handed him a tablet. On the giant screen, a phrase Sophia had typed appeared. All stars deserve to shine. The auditorium, which had been in stunned silence, erupted in applause. But Sophia's act didn't end there. On stage in a glass dome was the AUTISM planetarium. Alexander had purchased it along with the company. Everyone thought he would give it to her, but Sophia walked to the planetarium, looked at it for a moment, and then pointed to a family sitting in the audience. Special guests from a local autism foundation. She pointed to their child, a boy gazing at the stage with awe. In a gesture of pure generosity, she was giving her dream to someone else. In the center of that stage where arrogance was unmasked, it wasn't a billionaire celebrating a corporate victory, but a father watching, tears in his eyes, as the lesson in humanity his unwanted daughter was teaching the world. Justice had been served, but the true revolution, the revolution of empathy, was just beginning. The fallout from the meeting was immediate and overwhelming. News of Collins Manolis Tech's acquisition and Michael Weber Schmidt's dramatic dismissal went viral. But what truly captured the public's heart was Sophia's story and her final gesture. The phrase, "All stars deserve to shine," became a slogan, emblazoned on news articles, social media posts, and murals across the city. Alexander hadn't just bought a company, he had ignited a movement. Under his new leadership, Groupe de Luxe Retail underwent a radical transformation. The name was changed to AUTISM Group. The AUTISM initiative was implemented with impressive speed and funding. The toy stores, once temples of intimidating exclusivity, were redesigned. Quiet zones were created for children who needed sensory breaks. Blinding fluorescent lights were replaced with softer, adjustable lighting. Employees, including Gabriele Moreau, who was promoted to manager of the flagship store, received intensive training not just on autism, but on neurodiversity in general, learning to recognize and accommodate the needs of all customers. The company, once teetering on the brink of collapse, saw its profits soar. Families who had once felt excluded from luxury retail now became its most loyal customers. The AUTISM brand became synonymous with inclusion and social responsibility, proving that doing good was, indeed, good business. Alexander, the billionaire strategist, found a new purpose. He channeled the vast majority of his resources into the AUTISM Foundation, expanding the initiative beyond his own companies, lobbying and helping other corporations adopt more inclusive practices. He became one of the most powerful voices advocating for neurodiversity in the corporate world, but he always deflected the spotlight to the true inspiration behind it all, his daughter. And Sophia? She bloomed. In an environment that finally understood and celebrated her, she began to find her voice, literally. With therapy and ongoing support, she started speaking her first words, then sentences. Her first complete sentence, uttered to Alexander as they watched the stars through a new telescope, was, "Daddy, look, Vega is smiling." To Alexander, that sound was more valuable than all the billions in his bank account. Meanwhile, Michael Weber Schmidt's fate served as a cautionary tale. Publicly humiliated, he became a pariah in the retail industry. No company wanted to be associated with the face of corporate prejudice. He tried to reinvent himself, started a blog trying to portray himself as a victim of cancel culture, but the video of the meeting and his arrogant email were irrefutable proof of his conduct. He ended up working a low-level job, isolated and bitter, haunted by the ghost of the empire he unknowingly handed over to the man he despised. One night, sitting in his small apartment, he saw a TV commercial. It was for the AUTISM Group's new campaign. It showed children of all kinds with different abilities and backgrounds playing together. The campaign ended with Sophia, now a little older, looking at the camera and clearly saying, "Here, everyone can play." It was in that moment that regret, late and useless, hit him with full force. He hadn't just lost a job, He had landed on the wrong side of history. A year after the incident, Alexander and Sophia were at the grand reopening of the flagship store. The Alara planetarium, which Sophia had gifted, had been replicated, and a version was on display in the center of the store, with a plaque that read, "Dedicated to all the stars who have yet to find their sky." Sophia ran through the store, laughing, interacting with other children, perfectly at ease in a world her father helped build for her. Alexander watched her, not as a billionaire or a CEO, but simply as a father, filled with a pride and love that seemed too big to fit in his chest. Michael had tried to destroy Alexander and his daughter, but he ended up destroying himself. Alexander learned that true revenge isn't about reciprocating the harm suffered, it's about building a world where the kindness of his daughter, and so many other children like her, could finally flourish. And you, what would you have done in Alexander's place? Leave in the comments if you have witnessed or faced a situation of prejudice and how you reacted. Sophia and Alexander's story shows us that a single person can indeed change the world, especially when fighting for someone they love. If this journey of justice and transformation has inspired you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications for more stories that prove that in the end, empathy is the greatest superpower of all.